What's up guys, and welcome back to the Bonsai-En YouTube channel. I'm Josh, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make the right decisions when you're putting together your bonsai mix, so stick around. Alright, so bonsai soil mixes. This might be the #1 debated issue in bonsai. And as funny as it is, most of the time when this is being debated, neither person is right nor wrong. And this comes down to the different questions that we need to ask ourselves when we're making a bonsai substrate mix. Because not every mix is going to be the same for every person, for every bonsai pot, for every tree, for every environment. So us as the bonsai artist, we need to know a list of things so that we can make an educated decision on what the best mix for that tree is going to be in our yard. So what I'm going to do today is I've got some notes written down here. I'm going to go through these things one by one that I've written down for myself that I think is important to tell you guys. And then that way, hopefully at the end of this video, you can go away and hopefully have the confidence to make your own bonsai mix. So let's jump straight into it. Now the first note that I've got down here is there's two types of bonsai soil that we use. And what I mean by this is it's two types of mix. So there's a mix that we use in development and there's a mix that we use in refinement. And when I say a mix, I don't mean, you know, one part this, one part that, one part that. What I'm saying is in refinement, generally we will use 100% organic materials, such as peat, pine bark, coarse sand, whatever it may be, all those organic materials, that's what we use in a development mix. And we know we use these because they're very rich in nutrients. The mix is a lot more dense, so this causes the roots to thicken and elongate. And we definitely wouldn't use that kind of mix in a bonsai pot because with the low gravity column that we've got in a bonsai pot, that kind of mix would clog up the pot. And you're not going to get the refinement that you want out of that mix either in a bonsai pot. Now, in saying that, I'm not saying that you 100% cannot use that in a bonsai pot, okay? Because you can. It's not like you're going to put, you know, just regular potting mix in a bonsai pot and your tree is going to die. That's not what's going to happen at all. But it's not optimal. So, usually we keep the organic materials for development. Now, once we move a tree into refinement, this is when we start looking at our inorganic materials, such as our akadama, pumice, lava rock, scoria, zeolite, perlite, all these kind of things, okay? This gives us a lot more control over our tree, and the tree's root system will grow a lot more fine and fibrous. But just know that in development, fully organic materials, in refinement, fully inorganic materials. Now, once again, I just want to note that there are some people out there that use a mix of inorganic material and organic materials in their bonsai pots. And once again, this is okay. It's not wrong. I'm not going to tell people who do that it's wrong, because in their area and the trees that they're growing, that might work perfectly for them. So I can't actually tell them they're wrong when they're getting great results out of it. But for them to do that, they obviously know what they're doing, they know what they're talking about, they know what their trees' needs are, so they've been able to make that decision and their trees are loving them for it. So let's go through some of these things and see how somebody might come to the conclusion of what they need to use in their bonsai mix. So I've got a bunch of questions that we would need to ask ourselves here, and the first one that I've got is, what is our environment like? Now, what I mean by this is there's some places where it rains for most of the year. There's other places where it doesn't rain a lot through the year. There's places where it's very humid, and there's places where it's very arid. Now, when it comes to these different places, you don't want to be using a mix that's going to go against that environment. So what I mean by that is, if you live in a really hot arid area, you're not going to want to use a mix that's super well draining and doesn't hold a lot of moisture, because your mix is going to dry out really quickly and you're going to be watering 5 times a day. But if you live in an area that rains all the time, then you're not going to want a bonsai mix that holds a lot of water and doesn't drain well, because you're going to get the opposite effect. Your tree's just going to start drowning. So this is where we need to look at our environment and just take into factor what the weather's like in terms of temperature, where it gets really hot, what the conditions are like in terms of humidity, and also wind. Wind is a big factor that people look over. If you live in an area like a coastal area that's really windy, wind dries out trees really quick, and I mean really quick. So having a higher moisture retention would be really helpful in that area. Now there's other things too, like, and these are very nuanced kind of things for people who live in areas that get a real deep freeze or cold during winter. Things like akadama will break down really quick in these conditions. If akadama freezes, it will break down much quicker than normal. And then also too, I haven't had personal experience with this, but I have learnt, and this is from a source in Japan, that using things like sand, so like kiryu that they use in Japan, if you have a lot of that in your bonsai mix, what happens is it holds a lot of water in the particles, and then that water freezes. And when it freezes, it actually expands the surface area within the bonsai pot. So if you can imagine that substrate almost doubling in size once the water gets in there, freezes and expands, that happens throughout the whole entire pot. The whole thing expands and it just pushes the pot apart. Okay, this is the same effect that when you get cheap bonsai pots in a really cold area, because those cheap bonsai pots, the clay is very porous, the water gets in the pores, freezes, expands, and pushes the pot apart and cracks it. That's why we get pots that crack during winter in really cold locations. So just keep those little things in mind. We need to know what our environment's like. Temperature, humidity, how much rain there is, wind, and do you get freezing temperatures, okay? So the next thing is, how often are we around to water? Now, a lot of the people in this hobby, 9 to 5 jobs, I would say that's probably 80% of people that do bonsai have a 9 to 5 job. So, if you're, and all these things that I'm going to say, they all kind of work with each other and interlock with each other. So, say you're somebody who is not home all day to water, and you live in a really hot, arid area. You're in the danger zone there of your trees drying out because you're not home all day to keep watering them, and if your mix dries out really quickly, it's gonna, your tree will die pretty fast. So, how often are you home to water? Can you water once a day, twice a day, 3 times a day? This kind of thing is going to tell you that if you're not around, you're going to have to up the moisture retention in your substrate. Now, something else you can do here is just reposition your tree to a position where it gets a good amount of morning sun, and then by the hottest part of the day, it's getting shade. Whether this might be a 30% shade cloth, or if it's just under the shade of a tree, if you watch where the shade moves around your yard of a day, you might be able to put your trees in a position where they get good morning sun, but shaded of an afternoon. But just keep in mind, you need to know how often you actually are going to be able to water. Now, the next question you've got to ask yourself is, what condition do our tree species like? Now, what I mean by this is things like your junipers and pines. They can get closer to the dry side of things without being affected too much. But there's other plants, like some of your deciduous and that, if they get too dry, you'll see that the leaves will start to wilt and curl up. They may even dry out and completely drop off. So some of our trees need to maintain a higher moisture level than others, while some tree species need to actually dry out a little bit before their next watering because they don't like their feet to be too wet. So, you know, like here in Australia, our Australian natives, they are really, really thirsty. They love water. Some of them we can actually keep them in trays of water all throughout summer. So with those kinds of trees, we would up the moisture retention a little bit more just to keep those trees happy. But with our junipers and pines and stuff like that, we can bring that moisture retention down a bit more. And you yourself can do some research. You can look up Akadama and what its moisture retention is, what its nutrient retention is, and you know how long it's going to last if it breaks down, because Akadama does break down. It's one of the inorganic materials that actually does break down. So look those things up, look it up for pumice, lava rock and all that, and then you can make the decision on what kind of ratio you mix these things at. If you need higher moisture retention, you might put more Akadama in and less pumice. If you need less moisture retention, you might put less Akadama in and more pumice. So you can kind of see how changing that mix changes the moisture retention, drainage and all that kind of stuff. So just go through, look at all the different substrates, look at the properties that they have in terms of moisture retention, drainage, nutrient retention, all that kind of stuff. And then just find out what your species like, whether they like to dry out a little bit, whether they like a lot of moisture present in the soil mix. Now, the next thing we need to ask ourselves, and this is an important one that a lot of people look over, and is how often do we repot our trees? And this isn't exactly a question of me asking you how often you repot your trees, but this is more of a species-specific question. So, say for example here, and I'll just give you a few examples, but we've got privets here in Australia that we grow as bonsai. As I've mentioned before, you could be repotting them every 6 months because the root growth is just crazy. But let's just say, for argument's sake, once a year for a privet. Okay, most of our deciduous material, every 2 years. Most of our coniferous materials, around 5 years. Okay, so what you need to ask yourself here is, if I've got a tree that gets repotted at a 5-year interval, I've got to have some substrate in that mix that's not going to break down and take away our balance of water and oxygen. Because we know for a good mix, we need a balance of water and oxygen. And what happens, and this is what happens really quickly with organic materials, and this is another reason why I wouldn't recommend using them in a bonsai pot. What happens is that material breaks down, and as it breaks down, it suffocates the mix. So it makes it a lot harder for oxygen to get into the mix, and it holds a lot of water. So basically, you think about it, you're drowning your tree, okay? You'll notice that the soil will stop percolating, so the water will sit on top of the soil surface rather than freely going through. So if you've got things like, your coniferous material, you're not going to put them in 100% Akadama, because Akadama breaks down after about 18 months, and that's a really high quality Akadama. If you get a cheap Akadama, it'll break down quicker. If you live in an area where you get freezing temperatures, it'll break down quicker. So obviously you're not going to plant them in 100% Akadama. Now I just want to clarify here too, because when we're in bonsai, and this is why there's so many arguments, is because there's so many avenues. You might have to use a lot of Akadama in your mix with your junipers and pines and all your coniferous material, because you might need a higher moisture retention. Okay? But just keep in mind that you're going to have to repot it every 2 years, and in that case, you're probably not going to get the growth that you're wanting. You're not going to get that really tight ramified growth by letting the tree become really root bound and getting that real tight compact root system. So, as I said, keep in mind the species and how often it's going to be repotted. We're really lucky here in Australia. We can use 100% Akadama on our deciduous, and we can use 100% Akadama on our natives. And this is because they can be repotted within the time that Akadama will break down. Akadama's got a really high moisture retention level, so those trees love it, okay? But as we move into other parts of Australia, that's not going to be true anymore, because some parts they get really freezing temperatures, so that Akadama is going to break down a whole lot quicker. Other parts of Australia, they get colder temperatures, so that moisture is not going to leave the mix quick enough because it holds a lot of moisture. So these things just have to be adjusted, and that's why we're going through all these questions. All right, now the next one is what's available to us. Not everybody has Akadama available to them. Not everybody has pumice available to them. And especially in the particle sizes that we need. You can go to a garden shop and get scoria, but it'll be in like 20 mil particle sizes, and you're not putting that in your bonsai pot. So you need to look around and see what is available to you, and you need to do the best with what you can get, okay? We don't live in a perfect world where we can get exactly what we need, what we want. So it's just up to you to take all these questions and just look at everything, analyze it, and see what's available to you, and just do the best with what you can get. Nobody can fault you for that. If you can do the best with what you've got, and somebody says, oh, look, you shouldn't be putting that in your bonsai pot, and you can say, well, look, I can't get this, I can't get that, this is the best I've got, I know that I'm going to have to repot in this amount of time because of this. So you'll at least be armed with an answer in that case. But as I said, just do the best with what you can get. And then the next thing here is particle size, which I just spoke about before. So generally when we buy inorganic materials, you'll see them come in, so our bags of Akadama here, they come in a bag of 2 to 4 mil, 2 to 6 mil, and 6 to 12 mil. And then our pumice, I believe it comes in 3 to 6 mil and 6 to 12 mil. So generally what we do is the bigger, and I'm going to really generalize this because I'd be here all day talking about this if I had to go through it all specifically. But what we do is generally we layer our bonsai soil. Some people do this, some people don't. Once again, there's no right or wrong. So, but personally, you layer your bonsai mix. So on the very bottom layer, at the bottom of the pot, that's where we have our bigger particle sizes, because it creates an aeration layer and a drainage layer. So it creates a layer at the bottom of the pot where water can freely run out. It's not going to get all clogged up in the bottom of the pot. And also it allows air to come up through the holes in the bottom of the pot and into the mix, okay? Because it's got that really coarse, much larger particle size right in the bottom of the pot. Now, in the body of our mix, right in the middle, this is where we would use our medium size particles. And now this is medium size against the tree you're using, okay? So if you've got a little shohin tree, you're not going to use, 12 mil particle size, because that'd be just silly. Okay, you're going to use a shohin mix. You're probably going to use about 4 mil particle size in a shohin tree. Whereas in, a chuhin tree, or in an imperial tree, you might be using 6 mil particle size. You might be, it's just, the bigger the tree gets, the bigger the particle sizes get. So the body of your mix, you'll use a combination of, for let's just say a chuhin size tree, for example, anywhere between 2 and 6 mil. And then on your very top layer, that's where you would use your finest particle, your smaller stuff, so probably your 2 mil, your 2 to 4 mil. 2 mil is getting really small, so I'd only suggest that in your shohin stuff. But let's just say 2 to 4 mil on your top layer, and this will help keep moisture on top of your mix and stop the moisture from evaporating quicker in the hotter weather. So just use it as like a surface dressing. I wouldn't use the real fine small stuff in the mix itself in the body, because you'll end up clogging it up, and it'll break down really quickly and you'll suffocate your mix really quickly. Okay, and our last thing here is what are our main objectives in the mix? And that is water retention, oxygen levels, nutrient retention, and our drainage. Okay, so we need to look at all these things. How much moisture does it retain? What are the oxygen levels going to be like? Because as I said, we always want to maintain that balance of water and oxygen in the mix. We also want the mix to be able to have some capacity to hold nutrients. When we fertilize, we don't want the nutrients to just come straight out of the bottom of the pot because it is soluble, meaning that it'll wash out of the bottom of the pot. If there's nothing in there that can actually grab onto those nutrients and have a cation exchange, then you're going to be pretty nutrient deficient in your mix. So Akadama actually has a really good cation exchange, so that's why we love it in the world of bonsai. So your nutrient retention and your drainage. And you've probably heard people say before that if you've got a really well draining mix, it's almost impossible to overwater your tree. And that is true. Because you can keep watering your tree and it's only going to hold on to the in the pores of the substrate particles. It'll hold moisture and the tree will grab from that when it needs. Okay? So it's not going to get all cloggy. Any excess moisture is going to run out the bottom of the pot because it drains really well. The substrate will hold on to a little bit of moisture. The tree will grab that when it needs it. So you're not going to get that standing water in the bottom of the pot. You're not going to get waterlogged or anything like that. And this is where I see beginners ask this question all the time. I'm going to have rain for a week straight. Should I bring my trees inside? And the answer is, if you've got a really well draining bonsai soil mix, no. Leave them out there in the rain. Let them soak up that, really nice, pure rainwater. The one chance that they get where they're not getting watered with, chemical-filled town water. Leave them out there. If you've got a really good draining mix, then there isn't going to be an issue. Alrighty, so I know that there was no flashiness in that video and no trees, but I really hope that for you guys that video was just full of information. And now, when you go to do a bonsai soil mix, if you go through this video again and write down all those points, have them on a piece of paper, and then when you go to choose a bonsai soil mix, you can look at all those things and ask yourself all those questions. And then you can look up on the internet, Akadama, how much moisture does it hold, what's its nutrient retention rate, pumice, lava rock, all that kind of stuff. Look it all up, and then you can make a good decision for you specifically, because once again, I can't stress this enough. If you go on Facebook and ask people what bonsai soil should I be using and they give you an answer, don't listen to it, because they didn't ask you what temperature does your environment get up to, what's your humidity like, how much wind do you get, how often are you around to water, what species are you working with, how deep is your bonsai pot, all this kind of stuff. So there's no possible way they could have given you a correct answer. The only way that you're going to get a correct answer from someone is if it's Joe Blow that lives next door, he's got really good quality trees. You go over and you say, hey Joe Blow, what soil do you use? And he's going to be able to give you a really good suggestion because he lives right next door in the same environment as you. Chances are you guys have the same species trees and you're getting your pots from the same spot. So that's probably the only time that you can get really good advice. Other than that, when it comes to substrate, you really need to learn these things and be able to make your own decisions. And that is based on your trees, your environment, and what's available to you. But I'm going to stop rambling on now and let you guys get back to your bonsai work. Once again, I'm Josh from Bonsai-En. Don't forget to share, like, and subscribe, as that really helps this channel. And until next time, enjoy your bonsai journey.